Welcome to episode 10 of the GoblinCast, and today's podcast will be completely centered on Bran Stark, everyone's favorite character in A Song of Ice and Fire, of course. And we're going to be looking at the character of Bran Stark almost exclusively in A Dance with Dragons. In part 1, we'll look at all of the visions he gets when he gets the weirwood paste fed to him in his last chapter in Dance. In part 2, we'll build off of that video and look at, can Bran actually interact with the past and or time travel? And we'll also look at the show and look at how D&D tried to do that as well, and if that is a larger part of the series that George kind of gave them a little bit of information on. And then in part 3, we're going to look at the classic theory, Jojenpaste. So connecting it back to the weirwood paste that Bran has, was Jojen actually sacrificed and or killed to awaken Bran's powers? And so this is going to be a podcast largely on mysteries and interpretations and predictions on stuff we just haven't gotten yet from George. Feel free in the comments to let me know what you think about anything relating to Bran in A Dance with Dragons. Enjoy. So the first one that Bran sees immediately after taking the paste that he gets, he sees this. Lord Eddard Stark sat upon a rock beside the deep black pool in the Godswood, the pale roots of the heart tree twisting around him like an old man's gnarled arms. The great sword ice lay across Lord Eddard's lap, and he was cleaning the blade with an oilcloth. Winterfell, Bran whispered. His father looked up. Who's there? He asked, turning, and Bran, frightened, pulled away. So this is the only one we see like right as he's getting this paste with, Bloodraven in the room. And this one, I think, the most likely point that I think would be interesting if it actually was connected to the main story exactly is in Catelyn 1 in Game of Thrones when she goes to Ned, who is cleaning ice in that first chapter. She notices that the tree that Bran seems to be looking through is almost looking at her. And so I think it'd be a good connection because George in that first book makes it well known of this presence seems to be watching her. And so I think it would add up as well because Bran goes on to say later on when we get the next Ned vision that Ned had some gray hair as well. So it would definitely have to be within that point of where we start the story at in a Game of Thrones, or maybe, a few years before. So that is obviously what the first one is. We're not going to dive into Bran actually maybe being able to communicate with people through these visions, but what just he sees. So this is probably the easiest one to predict of exactly when it was happening, but they're going to get much harder as we go on. So we then get, a couple paragraphs down after Bran leaves and he's kind of waiting around for Jojen and Mira. He ends up falling asleep or going into another vision once again. But then somehow he was back at Winterfell again, in the Godswood looking down upon his father. Lord Eddard seemed much younger this time. His hair was brown with no hint of gray in it. His head bowed. Let them grow up close as brothers, with only love between them, he prayed, and let my lady wife find it in her heart to forgive. Bran once again tries to communicate with Ned, which it seems to get a reaction from Ned. He lifts his head, but who knows? Again, this could be the wind. We don't know exactly, but it does seem like Bran is able to communicate with people in the past. And so what does this vision then mean? So we know that this is a younger version of Ned. We know it has to be early on, right after Robert's Rebellion, given what he's talking about. He's talking about, presumably, Jon and Robb growing up as brothers and being very close, and Catelyn being able to forgive him for whatever he's done. Now, you can go two ways with this theory. I'm not here to debate the theories. I think that one makes more sense given what the next line is going to be, because he seemed to follow a chronological order. We start off as close to the main story as possible with the first vision. Next vision, we go back to right after Robert's Rebellion, and then all of that, and then we're going to keep continuing down history. So to me, this means that, he wants Robb and Jon to grow up as brothers, because Jon is not actually like Robb's brother, even a half-brother, that actually Jon is a cousin more than he is an actual brother. But also, again, even if you believe this is Ned and Ashara, you want the two to grow up as brothers because they are half-brothers then in that case, either way. So it doesn't really all that matter. It doesn't really matter too much which theory you believe in. It still has more or less the same meaning, and that's why this piece of evidence can be used in multiple ways in terms of the parentage of Jon. And then the last part of it is just like, hopefully Catelyn forgives him for either sleeping with another woman in Ashara or whoever the other woman would have been, or for telling this lie that's kind of besmirched his honor and also is kind of a bit of an insult to Catelyn that Ned slept with another woman while they were married. Bran then saw this. Now 2 children danced across the godswood, hooting at one another as they dueled with broken branches. The girl was the older and taller of the 2. Arya, Bran thought eagerly, as he watched her leap up onto a rock and cut at the boy. But that couldn't be right. If the girl was Arya, the boy was Bran himself, and he had never worn his hair so long. And Arya never beat me playing swords the way that girl is beating him. She slashed the boy across his thigh so hard that his leg went out from under him, and he fell into the pool and began to splash and shout. "You be quiet, stupid," the girl said, tossing her own branch aside. "It's just water. Do you want old Nan to hear and run and tell father?" She knelt and pulled her brother from the pool, but before she got him out again, the 2 of them were gone. So what does this seem to show? It seems that there is a good connection between this older sister and younger brother. For me, reading upon this, even on my first reread, I thought that this was Benjen and Lyanna. And I did some deep diving because I wanted to look at what other people might have thought about some of these and which ones I agreed and didn't agree with. And there is this interesting point of evidence that I want to point out. I do believe that this is Benjen and Lyanna, just based upon the fact that Lyanna is somebody that looks exactly like Arya, or Arya, I should say Arya looks exactly like Lyanna in terms of how people look at her, especially Ned. He compares her to his sister quite a lot. And so I think that all matches. And why I do think that it is Benjen and Lyanna is it does get referenced right after Ned is talking about Jon and Robb, and especially about Jon's parentage, whether Ashara or Rhaegar and Lyanna. That's what we just got done talking about. So it would make sense that the next vision would have a link to that, because if you believe that the Knight of the Laughing Tree was Lyanna and that Benjen helped her do that and even would have been responsible of knowing information of how Rhaegar and Lyanna met, it would have made sense for them, Bran, to see this vision as well. It's kind of like that foreshadowing of putting all the pieces together to find out who Jon really is. But there is something in here that I saw someone point out, and that is that Bran thinks that this character that is Benjen, who I believe is Benjen, was him. Now, is this because he sees Arya and just their boy and a sibling, so he thinks maybe it's him? But at the same time, Bran doesn't realize that it's, not him because he doesn't remember this memory. But you would think if this was Bran, it would have to be somebody with auburn hair. Remember, Bran takes the Tully genes, not the Stark genes, like a lot of the other Stark children do as well. So why would he think somebody like Benjen, if this was Benjen? Benjen has very dark hair, and Benjen also does have very long hair. That is something we do get in the book as well. But why would he think that Benjen was him? And that is something that I think is interesting to this theory. I tried to find an alternative theory to this, and something I thought of that could make a lot of sense given where I think the time period has to happen. It needs to happen somewhere before like the Dunk and Egg stuff. I thought that maybe this could have been someone like Brandon and Barbary Dustin, given the fact that Barbary Dustin's hair color would also match that of Lyanna's and Arya's. So maybe that could be something that Bran came to a conclusion of, but nobody ever really compares Barbary Dustin to looking like Lyanna or Arya, so it's kind of a looser one. But once again, you kind of run into the issue where Brandon does not have the same hair as Bran. And also, Brandon and Barbary are estimated to be the same age. So, again, I don't know who this is if it's not Benjen and Lyanna. That's my biggest thing, is because the auburn hair thing really throws a wrench into this. I know no hair color is actually listed here, but it's because Bran thinks that this person in this vision is him, and based off his description, like Bran's actual features, there's not a lot of people that make a lot of sense here, given where we would fit this into the timeline of these visions happening. And so maybe this is just something that George didn't think about when writing this part of it, or maybe it's yet to be revealed. But that one kind of did stump me for a little bit. I don't really have anything to kind of disprove that idea of Bran having auburn hair and all of that. But after this point, the visions started to become quicker. He saw no more of his father, nor the girl who looked like Arya, but a woman heavy with children emerged naked and dripping from the black pool, and knelt before the tree, and begged the old gods for a son who would avenge her. Now, this is another interesting one, because given what the next line is, and I do believe, I want to talk about the next line and then come back to this one so we can fit it into the timeline. The next one is this. Then there came a brown-haired girl, slender as a spear, who stood on the tips of her toes to kiss the lips of a young knight as tall as Hodor. So this, to me, indicates Dunk. I know there's not a ton of evidence to back this up, right? We don't get any description about Dunk here at all to match that to a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But just based upon the fact that George seems to be wanting to do a novella in the North, it also would appear that you think about Hodor, how does somebody get that tall? It's very uncommon for something like that to happen. This would make a lot of sense if this was Dunk, and it would connect to the main story with Hodor. And so I think this is more than likely Old Nan and Dunk, just based upon where the timing of this is going to come out. Because if this is Dunk, again, this is based upon the idea that this is Dunk. Okay, anything that happens in the last vision that we just kind of skipped over, we glossed over about this woman, praying for a son who would avenge her, that has to come in between the early life of characters like Ned, Lyanna, and Benjen, and then the Dunk and Egg time. So that leaves you a bit of wiggle room, right? There's a little bit of time in there that we can try and figure this out. So I was editing this video and I was kind of doing a timeline that I'll have up on screen when I'm talking about some of the stuff during this section of the video. But I am not really clear on who this person could be that's named of this woman that's pregnant and giving this kind of speech about her son avenging her. I had an initial theory about Bran Stark and some of his line, and I'm going to kind of go off of that theory for this section of the video. But Bran Stark has a number of children. His first son being Rickon Stark, who is his heir. He ends up having two daughters, Sansa and Serena Stark. I had initially thought maybe it could be those two because their lines get passed up, even though they are the daughters of the heir, basically, to Bran Stark. And so I thought about that, and now I've kind of looked at when the estimated deaths for them are. It's way too early given the fact of where I believe this vision has to fit into this timeline. So the best theory that I can kind of come into is that we do know, we're given this line that it seems like the Starks had some sort of succession issues. I don't know if that led to an actual conflict or this is just some back and forth and some disagreements and all of that type of stuff. You even see it with Rickon's daughters in Serena and also Sansa. Both of them end up marrying other Starks, kind of trying to unite the claims. And we would see that that doesn't actually work down the road. So my best guess would be that one of these lines of either these two women or people in the next couple of generations, that succession crisis is what this is talking about. Somebody possibly being skipped over in the line of succession. And I initially had thought about it being Serena and Sansa's line, but that just doesn't really maybe fit into those exact characters because they die off a little too early in terms of when the Dunk and Egg stuff takes place. So maybe some of Serena's children down in the future, or maybe some of the other Stark lines that get passed over, would be my best guess as to who this woman that is pregnant is. After we see the Dunk vision, which again, I kind of went back because I think the Dunk one paints a good storyline. I think the Dunk one helps figure out a timeline for when that prediction of that character of Serena or maybe Sansa, whoever in that time period, when they had to be alive. So going on to the next one, we have a dark-eyed youth, pale and fierce, sliced 3 branches off the weirwood and shaped them into arrows. Again, there's only really one character that is known for doing something like this, and that would be Brandon Snow, a character during Aegon's conquest. This is the only character that comes to mind when I hear this line. I'll probably have the source and the part I'm talking about in Fire and Blood during Aegon's conquest when Torrhen Stark bends the knee, but beforehand, Brandon Snow is offering to try and assassinate the dragons and all that type of stuff. Very mysterious. But that is what I believe this is referring to. So that then takes us out of the Targaryen dynasty for the next vision. The next vision was basically, we see these lords that Bran glimpsed were tall and hard, stern men in fur and chainmail. Some wore faces he remembered from the statues in the crypts, but they were gone before he could put a name to them. Likely just seeing the kings of old, of winter. And then we get to the last one. Now, the last one is one I cannot possibly give you a name for. It's just too vague and it's too far back. But here is the vision. Then, as he watched, a bearded man forced a captive down onto his knees before the heart tree. A white-haired woman stepped toward them through a drift of dark red leaves, a bronze sickle in her hand. "No," said Bran. "No, don't." And they basically kill the man. This one, I think, is not necessarily to be something like, oh, who are these people? I think it's more to show the brutality of the North, and also something else, how blood magic seems to be a part of the old gods and of the three-eyed crow specifically, or even looking at the idea of there being blood sacrifices, something that Euron is trying to do. Could he have been motivated by something, being a failed student of Brynden Rivers or the three-eyed crow? Who knows? But that is my interpretation of the visions. Those are all the visions that we get in Bran's last chapter. Let me know what you guys think about them. I think that there are definitely some question marks here. Even the ones that seem more confident, right? Dunk and Old Nan, or Benjen and Lyanna, or even this Brandon Snow, could just not be the case whatsoever, right? There must have been other people that also knew what Brandon Snow maybe knew about these weirwood arrows or how all of that worked, but George just haven't given us any other characters that come to mind that are named that would have that kind of ability or reason to be shown to us. So that's kind of how I feel about a lot of these visions. A lot of these visions seem like, okay, they're very vague. You can draw a name, but there's not the most amount of evidence to back it up. Those are just my interpretation. The night was windless, the snow drifting straight down onto a cold, black sky. Yet the leaves of the heart tree were rustling his name. Theon, they seemed to whisper. Theon. The old gods, he thought. They know me. They know my name. I was Theon of House Greyjoy. I was a ward of Eddard Stark, a friend and a brother to his children. Please, he fell to his knees. A sword, that's all I ask. Let me die as Theon, not as Reek. Tears trickled down his cheeks, impossibly warm. I was Ironborn, a son of Pike, of the islands. A leaf drifted down from above, brushed his brow, and landed in the pool. It floated on the water, red, five-fingered, like a bloody hand. Bran, the tree murmured. Now, I am not the biggest fan of time travel just in general. I think it's something that's really difficult to write, but George has made it quite clear. To some extent or another, we will be going through time travel in A Song of Ice and Fire. Whether it's minor, whether it's major, that's for us to figure out. And we've already seen clear indications, like I'm going to point out in this video, that there is to some extent time travel. And that's even kind of been confirmed by George R. R. Martin himself, which I will talk about one of his interviews that he did that seemed to confirm this and some of the things that happened within Season 6 of Game of Thrones. And then we'll try to figure out, what does that mean for Winds of Winter, A Dream of Spring? What is the influence of time travel going to be? Is it going to be something major like it was in Avengers Endgame, where basically the whole plot revolved around it? Or will it be something minor that maybe affects a couple things, but is for the most part in the background to the more grounded parts of the world? That is for us to figure out in today's video. So let's start with George R. R. Martin's own words on time travel and the events that happened in Season 6 with the Hold the Door sequence. It's an obscenity to go into somebody's mind, so Bran may be responsible for Hodor's simplicity due to going into his mind so powerfully that it rippled back through time. The explanation of Bran's powers, the whole question of time and casualty. Can we affect the past? Is time a river you can only sail one way, or an ocean that can be affected whenever you drop into it? These are issues I want to explore in the book. Now, this is quite clear the only character that right now makes sense that we're going to talk about some of these issues, and George R. R. Martin even talks about it here, and it came out at a later date that, yes, one of the plot points given to D&D was the Hold the Door sequence, which makes sense. D&D are not clever enough to make something like the Hold the Door sequence. That's something George had to give them, and this interview kind of backs it up. It doesn't like fully confirm it, because he doesn't say, oh yeah, this is exactly what's going to happen, but he talks a lot about, at lengths of what that means and what he wants to talk about in respect of time travel. And something I found very interesting is when we think about, is time travel going to affect the world, we're already seeing that Bran is at least attempting to influence the past. Now, whether that's actually worked or whether that's not worked, we don't know yet. But we do know that Bran seems to be able to interact with it. We just don't know if, like George R. R. Martin says in his statement here, can he affect the past? Now, if the Hold the Door situation or the Hodor situation is like it is in the show, probably under different circumstances, but more or less that same plot point happens, then yes, Bran will be able to influence the past. But let's talk about it even further. Let's look at some of the book examples. All of these examples come from A Dance with Dragons. So like in the prelude, you see here that Theon seems to be being interacted with by Bran. Theon even makes that conclusion. It seems to be calling out to Theon so that he remembers who he is, and maybe that's for Theon as he has a bigger role to play in the rest of the story to help Jane Poole and things like that. But we also see two occurrences with Ned Stark. They occur in the same chapter, but at different moments. After Bran gets the weirwood paste, he has the following vision. Bran closed his eyes and slipped free of his skin. Into the roots, he thought, into the weirwood, become the tree. For an instant, he could see the cavern in its black mantle, could hear the river rushing by below. Then all at once, he was back home again. Lord Eddard Stark sat upon a rock beside the deep black pool in the Godswood, the pale roots of the heart tree twisting around him like an old man's gnarled arms. The great sword ice lay across Lord Eddard's lap, and he was cleaning the blade with an oilcloth. Winterfell, Bran whispered. His father looked up. Who's there? He asked, turning, and Bran, frightened, pulled away. His father and the black pool and the Godswood faded and were gone, and he was back in the cavern, the pale, thick roots of his weirwood throne cradling his limbs as a mother does a child. A torch flared to life before him. Right away, as soon as Bran tries to interact with Ned and says some sort of word or communication to his father, Ned reacts. And it isn't something that's like, oh, Ned looks up to see if it's the wind. He seems to be kind of on edge. He asks, who's there? There's definitely some influence here. And if you buy the idea that this is right before Catelyn walks in her first chapter of A Game of Thrones, it kind of adds up, because when Catelyn walks into go tell Ned about Jon Arryn's death and Robert coming north, she seems to feel like she's being watched as she approaches Ned. And this would line up perfectly with what's actually happening here. The same situation's happening with Ned cleaning ice. And so to me, I think this, again, is an indication that Bran is attempting to influence the past, or at least is able to interact with it on a surface level. This isn't the only time Bran interacts with his father. We see when he has a vision later towards the end of the chapter, when he's not with Brynden, he has this. But then somehow he was back at Winterfell again, in the Godswood, looking down upon his father. Lord Eddard seemed much younger this time. His hair was brown, with no hint of gray in it, his head bowed. Let them grow up close as brothers, with only love between them, he prayed, and let my lady wife find it in her heart to forgive. Father, Bran's voice was a whisper in the wind, a rustle in the leaves. Father, it's me, it's Brandon. Eddard Stark lifted his head and looked long at the weirwood, frowning, but he did not speak. He cannot see me, Bran realized, despairing. He wanted to reach out and touch him, but all that he could do was watch and listen. I am in the tree. I am inside the heart tree, looking out of its red eyes, but the weirwood cannot talk, so I can't. Eddard Stark resumed his prayer. Bran felt his eyes fill up with tears, but were they his own tears or the weirwood's? If I cry, will the tree begin to weep? So again, we see him influencing something in the past, right? Bran reaches out to his father, and his father seems to notice this, but he isn't sure what it is. He doesn't get as strong of a reaction as he does in the first vision that we see with the older version of Ned. But again, it shows that Bran is having some power or some influence while watching over his father in both occurrences. And like I mentioned with the Theon part of the open of the chapter, that's not even the only time that Theon is reached out to by, it would seem, either Bran or the old gods. As we note, and I'll have the quote up here, I'm not going to read this one because it's very similar to the one that I read at the beginning, but in this quote, we see that Theon is whispered to him, even though he seems to be completely alone, and wondering if he should do a prayer or anything like that. There's no one around that we know of, right? Unless this is all in Theon's head, which is also maybe true, right? That Theon is seeing things or hearing things, but there's too many occurrences here that seem to indicate something more. And so what does this all mean? Right now that we know that, yes, Bran is being able to influence the past and his power seems to be getting stronger and stronger, what is that implication for going forward in the story? So for one, again, the Hodor stuff seems to have been confirmed by George R.R. Martin that that's going to happen. So that, I think, will be probably the first time we see Bran do something meaningful in the past. But the question is going to be, once you open up that door to Bran being able to influence the past, how do you then write your story? Because now you have to go on this idea that Bran at any time could go back to an event like the Red Wedding and stop that from happening. Or is Bran someone that's going to be more like Bloodraven and start to realize, okay, he can't do that because if he was to go back and change the Red Wedding, well, then all these events don't occur the way they do, right? And so that maybe is something that Bran is going to realize is that by changing the past, if he can even do that, and to an extent of stopping the Red Wedding, how does that change the future of maybe this is like a Doctor Strange thing where this is the one out of, a billion chances for them to actually, either beat the others or not die off or whatever. How do you then make it to where Bran isn't influencing all the events that have happened over the story that could have really helped from, somebody going back and fixing that scenario? And so I think there's going to be a number of things that are going to occur. I think that Bran's, going back in the past will only be things that in retrospective make sense. So for instance, if you think about, for instance, Ghost's activity when Jon leaves the wall or tries to desert in book 1, Ghost seems to go kind of haywire on Jon. Ghost does not respond to Jon, and Ghost even gives Jon away to his friends that come to get him. So small moments like this that wouldn't draw a ton of attention, but have huge ramifications, because if it wasn't for Ghost, who knows? Maybe Jon's friends would have ridden past, wouldn't have known he was there, and Jon could have been executed, or maybe he gets to Robb and would have died at the Red Wedding. Either way. And that's what I think that we could see this time travel being used for. Things that, A, are going to gain us information that is important to progress how we beat the others or forward the story. So, for instance, Bran could confirm things like, Lyanna and Rhaegar having Jon or having Daenerys, whatever you think is going on there with parentage stuff. Bran, and this is, again, why I think he won't be a POV after he gets basically out of Bloodraven's cave, or at least once he gets back to the north, maybe, where you have other POVs. I don't think he's going to be a POV anymore because he's going to know too much. He's going to have too much power that we can't really be inside of his head. And so this is what's going to be interesting, though, is if Bran tells people that he can influence the past, how does that then change their perspective of him, right? Think about the thousands and millions of people that have died over the last 1,000 years. Bran could change any number of those events and save them. But will that fracture this timeline in which we get to the point where, okay, now we can't defeat the others because this didn't happen? And so I think that is something that George is really trying to struggle with, because you guys might be thinking, well, he hasn't introduced time travel yet or any of that stuff yet, really. But that's not necessarily true. We've already seen that Bran is able to at least interact with the past. At least to be able to interact with it in ways that it draws attention, right? So I think George, and the reason I think so many people believe that Bran is a big holdup on George is, one, Bran is a hard character to write because he is a child character. It's harder to write a character that isn't grown up necessarily like some of the other characters, where, Bran just has a weird view of the world and doesn't see things the way a normal kid or where a normal person, like a normal adult, would. And so you have that aspect of it. The other aspect of it is almost all of the magical stuff that we have in the story is related to Bran, and it's really hard to write because you have to, again, magic to me is one of the hardest things to write if you're going to do fantasy, because you have to make it believable and that it doesn't have a ton of plot holes, right? That's something that I think if you want to look at Harry Potter, one of the greatest magical, I guess, stories, right? Even that story has a good amount of plot holes just based upon things that Rowling didn't plan for and didn't think about going forward. So that, for instance, the Time Turners from book 3, it's something that's kind of a plot hole when you think about the entire series as a whole. Those are the things that I think are probably driving George nuts, because he's planted these seeds for time travel to be explored, like he talked about in that quote, but how do you then do those things and execute them? And so I don't think that A Song of Ice and Fire is going to turn into this time heist, in-depth focused about time travel, but I think it will have a role. I think it will be a part of the story that George uses to explore maybe the ethics of time travel and some of the complexities of it. But what I hope we don't see is it takes over the main focus of the story. But at the same time, you can't do what the show did. The show introduced time travel and then never talked about it again and never brought it up ever again. So he can't do that, right? So George is in this weird spot where he's, okay, you can't just, if you do time travel or some sort of influence of it, you can't just really ignore it. And you also can't, go overboard with it. You can't turn this very grounded fantasy series, a dark fantasy, into time travel story. It just doesn't feel, right. So I wonder how George is going to do that. But let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys all enjoyed a shorter video, but I enjoy talking about this concept, even though Bran is a character that I really struggle with predicting and talking about. But let me know what you guys think about time travel in A Song of Ice and Fire and in Winds of Winter. So Jojenpaste is really brought upon the idea that Jojen thinks about his death quite a lot. And so we're going to start with a quote. In Bran 3, Clash, Chapter 21, "He won't hurt me. This is not the day that I die." Again, this is really important to understand because Jojen seems to understand when he is going to die. He wouldn't be saying those things if he didn't really feel like he knew that, right? Even when we get in the Three-Eyed Raven's cave and dance, Jojen says, "When singers die, they become part of that godhood." Bran's eyes widened. "They're going to kill me?" "No," Mira said. "Jojen, you're scaring him." And Jojen responds, "He is not the one who needs to be afraid." So again, Jojen is afraid of being killed. That's basically what he's talking about here. So we get another context where it seems like Jojen understands his fate, or he knows that he's going to die rather soon. And we'll talk about this a little bit later when we actually get to Bloodraven's cave, where he starts acting a bit suspicious. Like, he starts acting a little bit more broody, but that's a little bit later on in the timeline or in this video. But the other part of this is it leads us to believe that Jojen has possibly seen this fate through one of his green dreams. And why is that important? Because again, we see that there is this conflict between Mira and Jojen, where Jojen is always pushing Bran that he needs to go further. He needs to see Bloodraven and to awaken his powers. Mira is the other way. Mira is very much kind of against this. She doesn't want this to happen. And to me, that seems a lot like because Jojen has told Mira what his dreams are about. Even in a line we get in Clash to kind of back this up, Jojen and Mira say that "my brother has the greensight," said Mira. "He dreams things that haven't happened, but they do." And then Jojen responds, "There is no sometimes, Mira. A look passed between them, him sad, her defiant." So again, basing on what this theory is about, why would he be sad while she is defiant? Because Mira is trying to play this role of defeating fate, defeating prophecy, kind of the way, if you think about Star Wars, Anakin, how he's trying to defeat these dreams that he's getting. That's kind of the way Mira is taking this, where Jojen is kind of accepting it. Jojen is saying this is what has to happen for the better or worse. This is what's going to happen. And so Jojen's leaning into it, and that's why he's sad, because he would be seeing his own death. And so the next part of this is like, based on what I just said, Mira, it would appear, knows about this. Because when they go north after Winterfell gets sacked and they're at this Tumbleton Tower, they're in a relatively safe area, right? No one's going to come here. It's in I believe, the Wolf's Wood at this time. There's no one really around to look for them. There's, from what Mira says, there's plenty of game and they could fish. So again, it seems like they're in a relatively safe area. They could just wait this out until the war was over. And that's not enough, right? Jojen says they need to keep going, whereas Mira, again, takes the safe route, because I think Mira sees it as this is a way that we could defeat this prophecy. If we just stay here, none of this is going to happen. But again, Bran, because Mira allows him to choose, Bran chooses to go north to learn more on his powers. Now, it's very misguided because I think Bran is more motivated by humanistic things like wanting to walk and wanting to be able to not be a cripple anymore, but that is not the case. But when we get further into their dynamic, right, because Mira and Jojen, I think, are the most important pieces because their interactions tell us a lot about this theory. But we look at their last scene, and this scene that we get before the Jojenpaste is very telling, because Mira notes that he wants to go home, but he will not fight his fate, which again begs a question: what is this fate? And two, why is she not pleased about that? So again, I think this is very human, right? Jojen, seeing his death, wants to run. He wants to go home, but he won't fight it. And a part of him maybe thinking that he's going to go home, whether that's whatever gods he believes in, the old gods, that he's going to go home in the afterlife. That could be possible. And so I think that's very human. But Meera is just, she's basically despairing because she realizes that her brother could be lost at this point. And even when we look at the cave, right? Jojen is not seen very much, and even when he is, he's very sad. He's very down. There seems something that is wrong. And even when you look at the foreboding that he talks about with, he's the one that probably should be worried, not Bran, there's a lot you can infer there, that Jojen does not trust the Children of the Forest. He doesn't trust Bloodraven. And he even probably sees his death here. But when we get to the actual paste, let's kind of look at this description and see what that can tell us as well. She had a weirwood bowl in her hands, carved with a dozen faces like the ones the heart trees wore. Inside was a white paste, thick and heavy, with dark red veins running through it. "You must eat of this," said Leaf. She handed Bran a wooden spoon. The boy looked at the bowl uncertainly. "What is it?" "A paste of weirwood seeds." Something about the look of it made Bran feel ill. The red veins were only weirwood sap, he supposed, but in the torchlight they looked remarkably like blood. Again, it's just weird the way this is described. Right away we're told that it looks like the bowl that she has is carved with a dozen faces, given to imply that could be, Jojen's face in this paste or whatnot. But also the way that we look at how this is supposed to awaken Bran's powers. That's something I'm going to talk about here in a second, but when we also look at this paste, it's described as being bloody, as like veins running through it. Very weird. Again, when we look at the story of Dance and Feast for Crows, there's a lot of cannibalism, right? If we just look at a couple notable examples between Stannis' soldiers doing cannibalism in their desperation, whether that's Frey Pies, whether it's Vargo Hoat at Harrenhal being fed parts of himself and even the prisoners as well, Brienne getting eaten basically in Feast for Crows, like her cheek more or less, Cold Hands' apparent pork, and also Skagos, which is said to be this cannibalistic island. But all of this is for a reason, because blood magic we've seen as the most powerful form of magic in the story. We're told that over and over and over again. Think about Qyburn's line to Cersei and the way that blood magic is the most powerful magic when it comes to Maggie the Frog giving that prophecy to Cersei. All of that's very important. And so Jojen, who is a green seer, his blood and his powers could be used to enhance Bran's. And that all could be what this has all been about, is that Jojen has realized not only is his goal to bring Bran to Bloodraven, but he himself is supposed to sacrifice himself for the better good to awaken Bran's powers. And what could really be really disturbing about this idea would be that if Bran doesn't become this good character, if Bran becomes someone that makes questionable decisions, he isn't really even Bran completely anymore, where he has aspects of Bloodraven and others in him, and maybe even the Children of the Forest kind of use him as a vessel to do what they need to do. So all of this could really make Jojen's death very tragic. And, we probably will eventually find out what this information was, especially through Meera. But again, it's going to be interesting to think about how Meera views Bran, right? If Bran did actually eat her brother, how does that relationship go forward? Or has Meera just accepted it? Has Meera known this whole time, given what Jojen has probably told her, that this was going to be his inevitable fate? And so just to kind of back up the idea that, blood magic would be the best option for doing some sort of awakening of Bran's powers, just think about the shadow babies, right? That Mel has using blood, whether that's trying to awaken stone dragons with Mel, whether that's even the dragons coming back into the world, prompting magic to really be at its heights. That's another key factor of this whole point, is magic coming back into the world is also helping the strength of the old gods, of the Children of the Forest, of Bloodraven, to enhance Bran's powers as well. Think about how all the Starks, even without really being trained, people like Robb, people like Jon, Arya, are having wolf dreams. That's really important to understand as well going forward. But thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you guys all enjoyed